What is going on, everyone? I hope you're all doing well. Today we are finally going to be getting a look at the new RTX 4070 Founders Edition graphics card, which you may be noticing is a little bit smaller than the previous Founders Edition cards that we've seen in the 40 series, like the 4090 and the 4080. Sadly, we didn't get a 4070 Ti Founders Edition, likely because NVIDIA wasn't really planning a 4070 Ti, so they kind of probably just took the extra 4080 coolers that they had and used them for the other 4080s and not the 4080s, which ended up being the 4070 Ti's. But I digress. It's a significantly smaller cooler, but they're still using the 16-pin power connector, which this time around is using two 8-pin PCI connectors on there to power the RTX 4070 GPU inside with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory, and this bad boy is going to be priced at $599, so still a little bit steep, for what we're comfortable with usually in the mid-range. Mid-range should usually be in around that $400 to $500 range, so prices are still up from what they were, 4 or 5 years ago, but it's kind of just the way the market has gone nowadays. But as a result, for the comparison today, I'm going to be comparing it against the 4070 Ti as one of the cards, because that makes sense if some people might be trying to decide if they should go the next level up or just go with the 4070, as well as the AMD 6950 XT, which is a 16 gigabyte GDDR6X card, not GDDR6X. And the reason I'm testing that is because it comes in right around the same exact price point which you are likely to find RTX 4070s. Looking over on Newegg, they actually have a 6950 XT card available from ASRock for $629 with a $30 promo, so that would knock it down to $599 there. And this one also comes with a free copy of The Last of Us. There's another one for $680. I also saw some variants over on Amazon for $650, $700, $680. Another one down here for $630. Oh, that's a 6900 XT, which is pretty close, honestly. So you can find 6900 and 6950 XTs for around that $600 to $700 price point, which is realistically where we're going to see aftermarket cards like the 4070 ending up sitting. So I thought the 6950 XT would be a good comparison to make for people that might want to or looking to spend around that $600 to $700, but don't know which card to get, so let's get into it. For all of my testing today, I tested it, like I said at the start there, I think I did anyway. I did all my testing, 1440p, 4K. I'm going to have rasterized tests as well as ray trace tests that are going to be shown separately. All of the games otherwise, and nothing, there won't be anything noted, unless noted, but everything was tested at the maximum available in-game settings. The only differences were whether ray tracing was on or whether it was off. I did not use DLSS or FSR or Intel XeSS for any of the testing here. This was just native resolution. So if it says 4K or 1440, it's just native res, either ray tracing on or off with the average FPS and the 1% lows. Also, to eliminate any CPU bottlenecks here, I'm testing on the 7950X CPU from AMD and 32 gigabytes of RAM, and I'm using the latest drivers from both each NVIDIA and AMD. For AMD, I forget the exact driver number, but for NVIDIA, it's the press driver for the 4070, which won't be available to the public, but very likely the same exact driver with a different number should be available when the 4070 launches on the 13th for you guys at $599. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the graphs here and see how the 4070 is stacking up at that $600 price point, and if the 4070 Ti is worth considering spending the extra couple $100 for in getting that. And it does look like it is banging out considerably better performance in the vast majority of titles. There are some titles that are closer than others. Far Cry 6 was a fairly close one, but then we've got like Warzone 2 winning 128 to 96, like 32 frames per second. Yeah, pretty big margin. Returnal again, 127 to 93. 4070 though is looking like a pretty good option at $599, except for the fact that the 6950 XT actually does pretty well. And again, it's worth noting that these cards were priced a little bit above the $599 price point, but not that much. And there are some to be found for $600, right at the same price as the 4070, and it is doing a lot better here when it does come to rasterized performance. But this is NVIDIA versus AMD after all. NVIDIA's got more features, so when it comes to the ray tracing, a lot is going to change here. But overall, considering looking at this graph, the 4070 Ti is a pretty clear-cut winner. But the 6950 XT definitely holds its own and even wins out in some titles, even against the 4070 Ti that maybe seem to be optimized a little bit better for AMD, at least on the average FPS. Let's go into the 1% lows now. I'll put those numbers up on the screen there if you want to go through them. I'm not going to go over them at nauseum, but if you want to go through them and figure out the 1% lows. But for the vast majority of stuff here, the real story is for 1440p at Ultra. It seems like other than the Callisto Protocol, which has a lot of frame drop issues, you really shouldn't have any issues with modern titles, even something very, very demanding like Cyberpunk 2077 on the 4070, 6950 XT, or the 4070 Ti, all maintaining over 60 frames per second. Warzone 2 did have some struggles on the 4070 there. Could maybe be a VRAM limitation, maybe with the 4070. Who knows? Maybe could just need the driver update, but it does seem to be running better on the other cards by a fair amount, more than the 4070, and other titles are a lot closer there in the 1% lows, so maybe something to look at. But Callisto Protocol has a lot of issues there with frame drops, so no doubt that just has its own problems. But otherwise, you should be absolutely fine for 1440p, maxed out here. Other than ray tracing, mind you, you're not going to be able to use ray tracing on every game. At least at native, you'll probably need FSR or a DLSS or whatever, so keep that in mind. Going over to 4K, things become a lot less manageable for all three of these cards, but make no mistake about it, you certainly could play at 4K on a lot of games with any of these three cards. Obviously, the 6950 XT would be the most ideal. Maybe it's 16 gigabytes of VRAM over the 4070. Of course, the 4070 Ti is fine as well there. But over the 4070, the 6950 XT would have a VRAM edge, but still pretty close here in some of these titles. But it definitely wins out handily in some like Guardians of the Galaxy, Far Cry 6, Warzone 2, Watch Dogs Legion, all did a lot better on the AMD 6950 XT, which is priced a little bit above. I have to keep mentioning that there so you guys are aware. But the 4070 still does very well here at 4K, even with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. You know, Warzone 2 hit the average of 60, so there's going to be drops there. Cyberpunk is pretty low. But a lot of other games, Far Cry 6, Horizon Zero Dawn, Guardians, Returnal, Callisto, those are manageable. You can tweak some settings or just use DLSS, and that 53, 54 FPS number or the 50 in Watch Dogs Legion, that'll instantly shoot up over 60 frames. So using DLSS 4K is going to be viable, especially if frame generation is available. But otherwise, if you're, looking to stick to native, you might want to go to a higher tier card than the 4070. And here's the 1% lows for 4K, driving that home again. Some titles just way too demanding here for the 4070. But if you're playing older titles mostly and you want to play 4K and you don't want to spend $1,000 plus on a graphics card, then any of these three cards are looking like good options, but obviously steering more towards the 4070, 6950 XT, to keep those costs down well under $1,000. The 4070 Ti is pretty much going to push you up to $1,000 there. Looking at our ray tracing numbers here, we only have a small handful of titles here for ray trace testing, but some of the titles that we did see previously in there. So we've got Cyberpunk, Far Cry, Guardians, Returnal, and Watch Dogs Legion here making returns. And at 1440, it seems like ray tracing is definitely going to be viable for the 4070 or the 4070 Ti or 6950 XT, especially if you factor in, again, DLSS or FSR. Any of these titles that are averaging below 60, like Watch Dogs Legion at 51, that's not going to be a problem. And any sort of upscaling will get you over 60 frames in that title. Cyberpunk is another one you'll actually have to go in there and tweak some settings. And no surprise that the 6950 XT does fall behind considerably in most of the games here, in all the games other than Far Cry 6, but most of the games overall, as NVIDIA just typically does ray tracing a hell of a lot better. So if that's something that you absolutely want to have, and at 1440p, you absolutely can have your cake and eat it too. You can totally grab a 4070 for 1440 and enjoy ray tracing in a lot of modern titles, newly released games like Returnal and all of that, and be able to get the best graphics fidelity for 1440p and get all of the nice stuff too. So that's all well and good right there. Cyberpunk was the only one here where you might run into some issues, but if you get a 40 series, you got frame generation. If you get the 6950 XT, you don't have that. So that's one reason why you might want to go NVIDIA there. And even though they may be at the same price point, if you want to play, if you want to have that DLSS or frame gen, then it's probably worth going NVIDIA. Here's the 1% lows again here for 1440p on these games. Again, proven that, it could be pretty manageable for ray tracing here. Most of the titles did come down below 60 frames per second, but we still did reasonably well here in the titles that we tested. And I'll just quickly go ahead and throw up 4K numbers now here. The 4070 is not going to really be a 4K ray tracing card. That's really not what it's going to be marketed as, but including these numbers here anyway, so people can kind of go over them. And we'll go ahead and throw up the 1% lows now there, if you do want to go ahead and sift through those, but really not a 4K card. Cyberpunk, you know, we're looking at 10, 13 frames per second, and that's not even with the overdrive update. I did have the overdrive update downloaded, but I'm not using the overdrive update. I'm just using the ray tracing ultra option, as it would be for Cyberpunk 2077 or any of the other titles. Here was just the highest available ultra preset or ray trace preset that was available to testing. So final takeaway after all of this, 4070, is it a good card? Of course it's a good card. It's a solid card. $599. It is more expensive than, of course, most gamers would want it to be. We would love the 70s series of NVIDIA cards to still be around that like $399, maybe $450 kind of price point would be great. That would be ideal, but it's not the world we live in anymore. $600 has become the mid-range somehow. That has become the thing. But at the mid-range, the quote-unquote mid-range, at $600 to $700, 1440p is going to be powered for years to come. So that's a good thing. It almost seems like the mid-range has become more high-end. And a lot of people, you know, if you're on last-gen high-end, you don't need to upgrade if you're still gaming at 1440p. If you don't need to be on the bleeding edge of 4K and all of that, most of you probably won't even need to upgrade. But if you are in that $700 price bracket, between, you know, like the 6950 XT, as I said, it makes a compelling option for rasterized gaming performance, but that's really where it stops. It doesn't have any of the extra bells and whistles. So if you want good, I mean really good ray tracing performance, if you want the better upscaling technology, which is DLSS, if you want the frame generation, go NVIDIA. Hands down. It's a non-starter, honestly. But if you don't care about that stuff at all and you want a game it rasterized, I'd probably be looking at the 6950 XT or the 6900 XT or even last gen NVIDIA, which could still get you DLSS, which is better than FSR. Even though you won't get frame gen, at least you get the better technology there. And then you also have to weigh resolution, VRAM requirements. There's a lot of options there, but here's the gaming numbers, at least for you guys, so you can sort of make the best determination with the data out there available to you guys. As this is launch date, I'm sure there's going to be a bajillion reviews out there in your sub feed, so watch them all, watch as many as you can, watch who you trust, and make the best informed purchase decision that you possibly can. Didn't include any frame generation numbers here because FSR 3 is still not available. Everyone knows what frame generation can do, right? It doubles the frame rate pretty much. It's pretty magic. If you're playing games that are already getting abysmal frame rates, like Cyberpunk at 4K getting 20 FPS and turning it on, it's not going to make it better. It's going to make it technically look smoother, but it would still feel like you were playing the game at 10 FPS, and it would not be ideal, okay? You wouldn't want to do that. But for games that are like, I find frame gen works fantastic. Especially for me, like for some games where I want to turn on ray tracing, but then I'm like just barely getting 60, and there's maybe some scenes where I'm coming down below 60, like Spider-Man or Cyberpunk. When I whack frame gen on those titles, and then I'm getting 100 frames per second with everything turned on, no compromises, that's where I really feel like frame generation shines, even though I know I've heard other people say it really shines when it's like 100 FPS plus, and you can turn it on and play at 240 FPS. Well, that doesn't really appeal to me. I'm gaming at 4K. I'm fine with 120 to 144 hertz monitors. I don't need more than that. So frame gen is awesome for me. If I can get a game powered with ray tracing and everything at 60, and then bump that up over 100, I'm home and hose, baby, ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on if this helped your purchase decision and which way are you gonna end up going after launch day here with the 4070. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you tomorrow for another video. Peace.